All right. Well, we'll get going. We may have a few join late, but wanted to welcome everybody to our webinar on building cyber resilience. My name's Joel Sosebee. I'm with a company called AtNet Services out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I know many of you are joining from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. We're putting this webinar on as a peer organization, and these are our member institutions that are part of our peer network that really represent the US. And then we've also got a company within our peer group that's based out of the UK and also has a New Zealand presence. And so we'd like to welcome those of you who have been invited by our member organizations. And we've got Nate Rosas from Metro Sales. Hey, Nate. Appreciate you being here. And we've got Mike Sylvester, who's with our group out of Charlotte with AtNet.
Good morning, everyone.
So one of the reasons that we wanted to put this webinar on as is something that we deal with every week when we talk to business leaders. We talk cyber threats, we talk cyber risk, in addition to helping people with managed IT services to help focus on making their businesses more successful. Part of that is helping businesses manage risk. And in conversations with business leaders, there's a lot of misinformation in the space. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to put this webinar on was to sort of give you a different perspective on cyber threats, sort of the way that we see threats in the world, but also threats that can affect your organization, give you an idea of the economic impact as we see it from cyber crime and what that looks like at large. But we want to focus on specifically the cyber resilience part and how it differs from some of the things that you might already be familiar with and have implemented in your organizations from a cybersecurity standpoint. So we'll focus on those 6 core elements that strengthen a resilience posture for your organization, some of the benefits that your business will have as a result of implementing cyber resilience, as well as some of the key challenges that you'll run into along the way. Cybersecurity is not a destination, but a journey. So there's things that you have to do to adapt and overcome as threats change, as risk to your business changes, and then give you some practical steps to get started. So our goal for today is to give you some perspective, also give you some things that you can take away, but also stay out of the weeds. So this is not meant to be technical in our presentation. And just a little housekeeping, everybody will remain muted for the duration of the call. If you've got questions, we welcome you to ask any question along the way through the chat, and then we'll address those once we get to the end because we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nate with MSI.
Thank you, Joel. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nate, the Technical Alignment Manager with Metro Sales, Inc., also known as MSI. And today I want to emphasize why cybersecurity threats are everywhere and why vigilance is crucial in our digital age. To illustrate the prevalence of cybersecurity threats, let me share 2 recent examples from here at MSI. Last year, one of our servers was recently exposed to a 0-day vulnerability. This means our server had a flaw or weakness that has never been seen before, and cyber criminals were trying to exploit it. Fortunately, here at MSI, we have a cyber resilience plan that protected us. Our server was quickly taken offline because we have robust backup systems, currently thanks to Cove, and we were able to recover from the attack almost immediately with minimal disruptions to our business day. Next, we had 2 clients that recently faced compromises to their Office 365 accounts. What do these compromises look like? They were suspicious user accounts that were creating new accounts at weird times of the day and even creating new administrator accounts. One user even logged in from Tokyo when the client's company, no one has ever been to Tokyo or even Japan. Fortunately, our service team responded promptly and our client suffered minimal damage from these impacts. Next slide, please. As I've just illustrated, cyber threats are a real and present danger. But the risk isn't limited to individual companies. It's a widespread issue that affects small businesses across the globe. In fact, the threat landscape is becoming increasingly complex. Companies can expect the cost of dealing with cybercrime costs to increase 15% every year as cyber criminals increase their activities globally. In fact, fighting cybercrime globally is expected to cost $10.5 trillion this year. Maybe a company like Microsoft can afford to fight cybercrimes because of their huge profit margins, but most of us can't afford huge financial losses that could result from a cyber attack. And small businesses are prime targets because they may not be as well protected as larger corporations. In fact, almost 20% of small businesses are forced to close after cyber criminals successfully attack. Doing nothing about cybersecurity can be devastating to your business, but there are steps you can take to protect them and mitigate these risks. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into the specific challenges faced by small businesses in the cybersecurity landscape and examine some real-world scenarios of the impact of cybercrime to small to medium businesses. As we've seen, the threat landscape is becoming increasingly complex, and cybercrimes are only going to increase in the future. Half of all global cyber attacks target small businesses. Additionally, 74% of all small to medium businesses self-manage their cybersecurity or rely on informal help, like a relative. This relaxed approach relieves them exposed to more sophisticated threats. The consequences of these cyber attacks can be catastrophic. 80% of businesses are underinsured and financially exposed. 60% of small companies that experience a data breach go out of business within 6 months. For many small businesses, a loss of even $50,000 due to a cyber attack or data breach will put them out of business. The financial impact of cyber attacks can be devastating. Mike here is a recent example. Would you like to share, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually, well, first, as Joel mentioned, I'm Mike Sylvester from AtNet. And we recently had a company, not a client, but a company contact us, or not a managed service client, that had an incident where the threat actor gained access to one of their sites through a VPN that was not secured fully with MFA. Their firewall had not been patched, and there was a critical vulnerability. And the threat actor was able to gain access into the environment through that entry point and ultimately deploy a ransomware that encrypted all of their server data and took the entire location offline. Sadly, in this case, they did not have certainly any form of cyber resiliency plans or processes in place. And the parent company ended up closing this location as a result, rather than trying to rebuild or restore. So it was an example, just as Nate's discussing, where a lot of small businesses, if not having the proper planning in place and resilience in place, can end up to the businesses closing, or at least closing, divisions or departments.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. Your example highlights the very real consequences of a cyber attack on small businesses. The financial and reputational damages can be severe, and in some cases, it can even lead to the closure of an office or entire business. Luckily not in your case. At this point, I think we all understand how important it is to protect ourselves and our business. It's easy to think this will never happen to me, but now let's explore the broader landscape of cyber threats and understand why no business is immune. Cyber threats happen all the time, everywhere and to everyone. Every business, regardless of size or industry, is a potential target. In fact, a business is compromised by a cyber attack every 39 seconds. That's an average of 2,244 attacks per day. Let's look at some examples of the 3 most common cyber threats that businesses experience. Number 1, ransomware. This is when a cyber criminal literally takes a company's data and holds it for ransom. For example, a small accounting firm in Texas was hit by a ransomware attack, which was locked out of their data and demanded $50,000 in order to restore access. The firm was forced to pay the ransom, resulting in significant financial strain and the loss of client trust. Number 2, phishing. This is where cyber criminals reach out to your employees and try to get personal data from you that they can exploit. For example, a small retail business in California fell victim to a phishing attack when an employee received an email that appeared to be from their business's bank, asking for login credentials. Unfortunately, the employee trusted the email and provided the information, leading to the breach of the company's financial accounts. Third, social engineering. This is when cyber criminals use manipulative interpersonal techniques to gain an individual's or company's secure data. For example, a small manufacturing company in Ohio was targeted by a sophisticated social engineering scheme where cyber criminals posed as a trusted vendor, convincing an employee to transfer $10,000 to a fraudulent account. The employee, believing the urgency and authenticity of their request, transferred the money, resulting in significant financial losses and reputational damage. Everyone will eventually experience being a target of one of these types of threats. Cyber criminals are getting smarter and smarter. They're no longer posing as Nigerian princes who need your help moving funds or laundering money. Every one of us and our employees, no matter how smart we may be, will eventually fall prey to one of these schemes. And if we aren't constantly vigilant and have a sound cyber resilience plan in place, remember, ignoring these threats is not an option. It's not a matter of if, but when your business is targeted. Thank you. Next slide.
All right. Well, what is this?
Turn over, Mike.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Nate. So what is this cyber resilience that we keep talking about? And how is that different from cybersecurity, which is obviously a term that I think most everyone on the call is familiar with and has dealt with? The primary difference between cyber resilience and cybersecurity is cyber resilience is broader. Cybersecurity is a critical component of resilience, but resilience is really the ability to not only anticipate, protect, but then withstand, recover, and hopefully adapt going forward to a cyber incident. The reality is, from a cybersecurity perspective, not all attacks can be stopped. As Nate just mentioned, and we tell clients and business owners all of the time that it truly is not a matter of if you will sustain a breach, it's a matter of when. The goal of cyber resilience is to isolate and minimize the damage from the attack and provide the ability to continue to operate. And obviously it's important for the survival of your business, just as we mentioned. So what are some of the core elements of resilience to strengthen cyber resilience? Well, 6 core elements that we're touching upon, as we already mentioned, cybersecurity being one of the foundational core elements, which is everything that we're familiar with. These are the proactive measures, security assessments, threat intelligence, vulnerability management. That's the cornerstone really of a resilience policy or resilience approach. But then secondly is incident response. No resilience plan is complete without a response strategy. And what's important about the incident response plan is that it is well thought out and documented in advance, and that way it ensures your businesses to act swiftly in the event of an attack, very deliberately, which will minimize damage and potential downtime. Part and parcel with that is the business continuity component, which of course people immediately go to disaster recovery, backup systems, and those are important, but it can go beyond that. Alternate processes that are critical to keep your business running. Sometimes even backup systems may not be available. So it's having that continuity plan in place, well thought out to keep operations running during any kind of disruption. Adaptability is another core component. Obviously, Nate said cyber threats continue to evolve. The landscape's changing. Threat actors are changing their tactics on a weekly, if not monthly basis. And being able to adapt your defenses is critically important. Staying informed about these new trends and learning from past incidents within the industry, within the rest of the world, helps keep you ahead of threat activity. And employee awareness. Your employees, part of cybersecurity is the awareness training, which we've all heard of before. Having that regular training for employees ensures that your employees know how to identify, spot, and hopefully not fall prey to some of these tactics. All of the tools, all of the cybersecurity tools and products are only going to protect against 20% of cybersecurity threats. The rest of it is 80%. So 20% are tools, 80% are people and processes. People continue to be, quite frankly, one of the weakest links which is why phishing tactics continue to be at the top of the threat actors' tools that they're using. And then lastly, if you're in an industry where there's compliance, regulatory compliance, adhering to those standards, obviously, whether it's HIPAA or other standards, can help avoid potential penalties by not complying, but also many of these have requirements or frameworks that help strengthen your overall security posture. So what are some of the benefits then of being cyber resilient? Well, some of them we've already touched upon and are somewhat self-explanatory, but obviously protection, a resilient business has that cyber security protection component in place to protect and safeguard your critical data and critical systems to help minimize the overall impact of cyber attacks. Then there's the continuity portion that we just touched upon. Even in the face of a disruption, resilience allows your business to continue operating. You have customers, vendors that rely on you, and having the continuity in place will strengthen those relationships. Obviously, another benefit is the potential damage to reputation. Any breach can significantly erode reputational trust overnight. So demonstrating that you have adequate resilience in place not only reassures customers that their data is safe with you, but it overall helps shore up and enhance your credibility as a business or business partner. And then again, finally, compliance. Cyber resilience helps align your business with whichever regulatory requirements you have, which can obviously help avoid some of those penalty costs, but also help maintain a competitive edge in mind. So in general, what are some of the challenges then to implementing a cyber resilience policy, Some of the challenges that you can face are going to include the fact that, as we have already mentioned, the threat landscape is ever changing and ever evolving. Cyber criminals are always finding new ways to exploit vulnerabilities, to exploit your people, and keeping up with these challenges is critical and requires constant vigilance. Another challenge can be the financial constraints. Cyber resilience, in some ways, you could almost expend as much capital as you desire. It's in a way, I liken it to insurance. You can spend as much on insurance as you really want, but is it practical, and what are the pros and cons, the benefits of that? Obviously, we all have limited financial resources, and being able to identify and prioritize the required components is critical to minimizing potential financial constraints. And then the complexity is also challenging, as we've mentioned, just the complexity of the environment, the complexity of the cyber landscape, and even implementing into your business environment and existing workflows that can be overly or overwhelming just based on the different aspects. And finally, awareness. Not just the employee awareness, but leadership. It's important that leadership and employees understand the overall importance of cyber resilience, but this is a challenge for many organizations, which can then lead to potential gaps in your defenses. So recognizing some of these challenges, what do we do about it, right? I mean, if I'm sitting in your shoes, I'm asking, well, that's great. What can I do to get started? Well, what we've laid out are 6 steps to help you get started, although there are 7 on this slide, and you'll understand why in a minute. But first, we really try to get business owners such as yourselves to embrace what we call an assumed breach mentality. It goes back to, it's not a matter of if you sustain a breach, it's a matter of when. So we need to start thinking in those terms. Secondly, it is so important to engage an expert to help. You may have excellent internal resources, but no one can keep up with all the complexities and everything that's evolving on the threat landscape. Add an expert and engage an expert to your team. This is very, very important. Thirdly, engage someone and have a risk, or what we like to term a business impact assessment, performed. A business impact assessment will help identify a lot of these areas of risk, potential gaps, walk through and help develop, and we'll get to that in a second, but some of the other components. So it's very important to go through this process of identifying risk, quantifying, and then developing these plans. Fourthly, evaluate your cybersecurity insurance policy. Maybe you don't have one. We mentioned earlier on one of the slides, I believe, that some of the industry members have done research indicating that a vast majority of businesses are either uninsured or underinsured against cybersecurity. Make sure that you have someone, or that you go through and evaluate limits, constraints, exclusions, etc., of your cyber policy. Fifthly, start using a cybersecurity framework, something that can help walk you through methodically how to implement a lot of these things. You don't need to recreate the wheel, so to speak, and do these on your own. It's important to use some form of cybersecurity framework. And then make sure that you actually at least get a draft going, document an incident response plan. We talk to businesses frequently that when asked, do they have an incident response plan, they may say no, they may say yes. And when we ask to see a copy of it, the response often will be, well, we just know what we're going to need to do. We have seen from experience time and time again, you don't want to be reacting in the moment of a cyber incident, trying to figure out who to contact, what to do next, etc. Laying out a detailed incident response plan takes a lot of that decision making out of the emotional heat of the moment, and it's documented, and you're following it very much. If there are any pilots out there, very much like an emergency checklist for pilots. It's another important. And then seventh, I said that even though we were talking about six, I want to loop back and just reinforce, engage an expert. You're not out there, you don't need to be doing it alone. Make sure that you engage an expert to help your team and help the overall process. So how can you at least start this? Again, begin with looking at a cybersecurity framework. Two frameworks are two of the most common that many of you have probably heard of. One is the NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. Another very good framework is put out by CIS, the Center for Internet Security. But the NIST framework, just as an example, will walk you through the 5 different phases or steps, identifying. This is about understanding what you have, where important data is, what needs to be protected, and taking that inventory of critical assets, systems, people, critical processes. Then the second step being protecting. That's obviously having the cybersecurity controls, tools, etc. in place, having the appropriate detection capabilities and tools in place to monitor for suspicious activity. Early detection and alerting is important so that you can respond quickly. Once an incident, even with the best protection in place, once an incident occurs and breaches do happen, having that well-documented incident response plan in place will help your business respond quickly, contain, and allow a quick and a faster ability to recover, and maintaining that continuity of business that we discovered. It's important to really walk through a framework such as this, and that will help get you on the path to building adequate cyber resilience. That's really a quick summary. I know it's a lot of information, but we wanted to give you some insight into what you can do to get started, some of the steps, frameworks that can be used to begin following, and again, engage an expert. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Joel if there are any questions that we have from the participants.
All right. Yeah. Submit your questions if you haven't already done so, and we'll address those as we go. Austin, do we have any questions that you've received already?
Yeah, we've got several here. So the first one for you guys is, as people working in MSPs, what are some common cybersecurity mistakes that you see small businesses make?
Ooh, that's a good one. Thank you for that, Austin. To this point, employee training is a pretty big one. Educating your employees to recognize phishing emails, social engineering stuff. There's some numbers that we like to use here that human error causes 95% of cybersecurity breaches. So if you're wondering how you can improve your cybersecurity for potentially cheaper, employee training is one of those areas. Started at the root source here.
Well, Nate, that's exactly right. Remember, Nate talked about social engineering. It's not always breaching your systems per se. It can be breaching your people and getting this, I'll say stereotypical, but it's amazing how frequently it continues to happen where monies are transferred, ACH or wire transfer, simply due to social engineering techniques, phishing techniques, where there isn't actually software code or a breach of the network or systems, but the impact can be just as devastating. Another area that we often see, I think mistake-wise, when we talk to businesses, is that many people have implemented multi-factor authentication, and they think that that's maybe the silver bullet, the end-all, be-all. Hey, we have MFA, so we're good. And cybersecurity is much more than simple than MFA, but cyber resilience, as we've already touched upon, is even more encompassing. So I would say it's great. MFA is critically important. It's one of the critical controls that we discuss and bring up with business owners, but I think that the mistake is sometimes a false sense of security.
Well, if I could add to that a little bit too, as you kind of went through the framework, and I know that can be a little confusing if you've never seen that laid out before, but it's also the continuous alignment of all those things. And so there's an active process. We always talk about tools being 20 to 25% of the equation for the strategy that you need to employ. And the reason for that is because things change. You onboard and offboard devices, you offboard and onboard users. And as you make those changes, there can be security elements that can, remain unchecked if there's not a continuous process for making sure those things are adhered to as well. And so it really is a prescriptive model of really how to walk through this, and ultimately the hope that there is, even though the threat is huge, there's things that can be done to minimize your risk.
Well, and even along those same lines, Joel, we talk about all the time, none of these things are a one and done. Even your incident response plan should not be well, we created it and then put it on a shelf until we need it one day. It is a constant process of evaluating, course correction, reevaluating, et cetera, not just on the security piece, but even from your business plans, your business continuity plan, your incident response plan. So absolutely, that's a great point, Joel.
Anything else on that front, guys? On the control side for small businesses or mistakes?
For small businesses, another common one is software updates.
Okay, yeah.
Software updates are at a developer discretion. So it is on now you, the client, to be informed of when the developer updates their software to update it, which is that business relationship is a little bit hard to manage, in my opinion. So this is where a managed service provider comes in. You're now paying us to manage their developer software updates and making sure that they're secure before they hit your system and become vulnerable in this case. Another fun data point for you here is 60% of data breaches involve vulnerabilities where there are patches available. So the developer has fixed the bug, but the system where it's being implemented hasn't yet been updated. So as the managed service provider, it's on us to the developer has posted the fix within a couple of days, implement the fix. Service level agreement.
Well, and you mentioned 0 days earlier for when there's not a patch available, but there are some compensatory controls that you can implement as well. So understanding
that is the incident response plan.
Yeah, understanding where there's risk in that and how you respond to those things as well. So having, again, it's a very active thing. It's not a one and done kind of approach.
Then the only other thing that I would add, mistakes that we often see are exceptions. How often businesses And it usually, not to pick on anyone in this webinar, but it tends to be the executive team, the leadership team, the C-suite individuals making security exceptions due to convenience, efficiency. Hey, I don't want to be bothered by that. And those tend to be, I shouldn't say tend, those are the weak points that end up getting exploited. In most breaches, I shouldn't say most, I don't have any empirical evidence, but more often than not, what we hear is the entry point ends up being an account or an exception that was made from some security component. So protecting your organization is exactly that. It needs to be the entire organization. You wouldn't leave your back door open and lock everything else and then expect nobody to rob your house. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Austin, you have any other
Yeah,
questions from
So
folks?
we got a question along the same lines of what you guys were talking about with training, continual training. Are there any courses that you recommend? And also, how do you keep your employees continually trained so that they don't make those mistakes further down the road?
I speak to personally here at MSI, we partner with a vendor called ThreatLocker, which provides security awareness training updated and managed through them. The training is then able to be performed on potential employees. So you can send them a test or a quiz before they would join, and it will assess them and give you a number to measure how their cybersecurity score. So you can use this to empirically measure, and in this case, vet employees based on cybersecurity as a managed service.
Yeah, and I would say there are a number of good cyber awareness training companies, some that offer a broader range of security services. But I think the most important part is to ensure that people are actually doing the training. And we've seen two methods, right? The carrot and the stick. We have seen businesses that require employees to maintain the training, and all of these platforms have a way to give feedback of how the employees are doing. Are they completing the trainings? How are they completing tests, little quizzes to ensure that information is getting retained, et cetera. In some cases, businesses have made it a requirement to employment that they keep up their training. In other cases, that they've offered incentives, whether it's, a lunch, a gift card, maybe an internal teams. A lot of these platforms have scoring ways to keep track sort of who's doing the best in terms of keeping up with their training. So there's a number of different ways, but ultimately it has to come, as many things, from the top down within your businesses, within your organizations, that from leadership really imparting that strategy across the organization.
Yeah, that's a good point. What other questions we got, Austin?
Yeah. So we've got somebody was asking about cyber insurance, and they were saying that they are starting the process of obtaining cyber insurance, and basically asked, are there any insurance companies that you consider reputable and fair?
I'm not willing necessarily to go on a limb and recommend insurance vendors at this point. I do want to try and throw a bone there. The federal government does offer grant money for being compliant within government regulations. So if insurance is a bit of an issue or a cost, you could look to get a CISA grant to supplement it.
I would say broadly, and I'll let Joel chime in here, but I would say broadly, there are a number of really good cyber insurance carriers. I think the most important thing is to ensure that whomever you choose, that they have dedicated cyber insurance team, that it's not, there are companies out there that are typical PNC that are, it's sort of like a rider or an add-on for cyber insurance. It's an analogy is you wouldn't go to your general practitioner physician If you had, pulmonary issue that needed lung transplant, or you needed cardiac input, you would go to a specialist. And just like many things in life, but make sure that you're going to a business that has a dedicated cyber insurance team. Joel, is there anything that you would add along those lines?
That's a lot of what I was going to say. So I mean, that's a perfect point. The one thing that I just wanted to make sure that I emphasized, and sort of echoing what you said, but then a little bit more, is just make sure you understand what the limits are. I mean, make sure that your business is properly evaluated based on your size and complexity, and that somebody can give you benchmarks for what they're seeing other businesses do based on your revenue, so that you make sure you maintain adequate coverage. And then beyond that, how that insurance policy would have to work should you actually have to file a claim. Do you have to front the money for forensic and legal if something happened and you had to use that? Or is it, did they front the money? Is it reimbursed? I mean, all those things are really important to walk through. We walk clients through that all the time just to make sure they've got the right coverage. We're not in the insurance business. There's no incentive in it for us other than to make sure that we're helping clients manage the risk. And that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Well, and we didn't get into the cost of a breach, quite frankly, because it is so broad. But for small and medium size, or even just small businesses, just the cost to remediate a breach can be minimally 50, 75,000 into the hundreds of thousands. And that does not take into account business interruption, losses of, revenue due to impact, et cetera. So as Joel's mentioning, properly sizing even the limits and understanding exclusions is critically important. So make sure that you do, as I mentioned, adequately review your cyber policy if you have one.
Yeah. What other questions, Austin?
Yeah, so we got one about the balancing, financial balancing, kind of what you guys talked about earlier. How do you balance the cost of implementing what will be a robust cybersecurity measure with the potential financial losses that come from a cyber attack?
That's a good one.
For us at MSI, we're typically looking at the cost to insure per company, and we're looking at local insurance companies. We're looking at seat prices and how much more that seat price is increasing for the service that we're providing. In this case, I could use Huntress as an example. Huntress as a vendor offers a suite of security tools, including endpoint resolution. So you can get a lot of you can get a broad spectrum of security tools, like employee training, multi-factor authentication, and some ransomware protection. And that's provided by one vendor for a relatively cheap price. So it's really, the tool stack is how we get a lot of our value, is by really looking at our vendors and seeing which ones provide the exact tools or exact solutions that we're looking for clients right now, but eventually to be more of a package solution once vendors are a little more uniform.
Well, there's a couple things that I'll add. I mean, one is just the security controls. So just more broadly, as you implement security controls, premiums tend to come down just depending on what carriers you're going with. So there are discounts that are available to you from insurance carriers based on the controls that you have. Certainly, they're going to want you to implement minimum security controls just to have the policy in and of itself. But, sort of think about it like your home, and, if you've got a security alarm, they give you a discount, and so on and so forth. Those type things apply even on the cyber side. And then the other thing is, so everybody within our peer organization kind of subscribes to the same framework from a strategic standpoint. And so it's really important as you kind of walk through this. Mike alluded to it earlier. We understand nobody we work with has a blank checkbook. So, I mean, there's ways that you methodically walk through these things, identifying, where you need to prioritize risk that you have, controls that you need to implement, and so on and so forth, so that the risks are uncovered and known to you. So you've got enough information to make an informed decision on your business. And if there's a financial impact or cost for any of that, you can sort of put that on a roadmap and deal with those things as it makes sense budgetarily as well. So those are sort of the ways that we all kind of address that for our clients individually.
And there are some, to dovetail off of Joel, that there are some minimum controls that most of the reputable, so to speak, cyber insurance carriers do require that can drive those premium costs. Many of which are the things you're familiar with: MFA on everything, some form of advanced endpoint detection, what you'll hear these terms, EDR, MDR, having segmented backups and immutability, unchanging, the ability for threat actors or inability for them to encrypt backups, continuous vulnerability management, and then, of course, the end user cyber awareness training. We found that those are probably 5 of the most common controls that many, if not almost all, of the cyber insurance carriers are requiring, or that certainly impact that premium calculation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We got time for maybe one question if we've got it, Austin, because I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
Yeah, I got one more. Business impact assessment was mentioned earlier. What is that? What's involved in that?
In this case,
yeah.
I'll
No, go
first
ahead,
here.
Nate. Yeah, you go
The
right
business
ahead.
impact assessment for MSI is we are looking to calculate in fiduciary costs now a theoretical cyber impact, a phishing example, a ransomware example, and what that would cost your company when your company is no longer operating, how much that's costing you, and doing all of the math now to calculate, okay, in theory, if a cyber attack were to happen, if my government were to now find me for being out of compliance, how much would that cost and what would that look like?
Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well,
you were about to say something.
You looked like you were about to say.
No, go ahead.
Give the summary, Joel. I like when we talk to folks. I like the way that you present it, and it's kind of, I would say, most simple form in terms of the assessment.
The way I would summarize it, because Nate, I agree with everything that you said, because that's really important to quantify that, especially individually for a company, so they can understand, what the impact to them could be. And we also kind of look at, we've talked about global risk and the risk that we see against all organizations, regardless of industry, sort of what the threat actors are doing and things like that. But it's important to understand, where is the risk specifically in your business? And so if you hear nothing else, or have heard nothing else that we say today, we want to make sure everybody knows that everyone is a target, and it doesn't matter what type of data you have. So it's not so much the type of data as you have technologies that are important to the way that you earn money in your business. And when those are withheld from you and you come in and that number one application is down, then there begins to be financial impact to the organization. So it's helping you quantify that, to Nate's point, and then also measuring the risk against that happening in your organization, and what are specific things that can be done to help you mitigate that risk. And that all gets uncovered in a business impact assessment.
Excellent. Thanks, Joel.
Guys, really appreciate the time, and everybody who attended the webinar, thank you so much for being here. We hope that you got some benefit from this. Everyone who attended will receive a recording of this, so you'll get that probably tomorrow. Let your respective companies that invited you to the webinar know if you have any additional questions. If there's anything that we can answer for you, whether you do business with us in the future or not, we want to make sure that you get value out of this conversation. We really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.